Iran has been playing this game for 47 years. Stall, threaten, demand, repeat. But something changed this week. Something that has the Iranian regime doing something they almost never do publicly. Panicking, not because of a missile, not because of a warship, not because of a bomb. But because of a weapon so precise, so devastating, so surgically effective, that no military force on earth can defend against it. And America just deployed it against Iran. Fully, completely, without warning. Tonight, we're going to show you exactly what that weapon is. We're going to show you why Iran's supreme leader is losing sleep over it right now. And we're going to show you why the next 72 hours could determine the entire outcome of this conflict. Stay with us. Segment 1, establishing the threat. 0:45 at 3:30. Let's go back to basics for a second, because a lot of people are confused about what's actually happening with Iran right now. And the mainstream media is not giving you the full picture. Here's the truth. Iran never expected to be in this position. When the Ayatollah gave the order to close the Strait of Hormuz, he thought America would blink. He thought the gas prices would spike. He thought the American public would get angry. He thought political pressure would force Washington to back down. That's the playbook Iran has run for nearly 5 decades. It worked on Carter. It worked on Obama. It almost worked again. Almost. Because what the Ayatollah didn't count on, what nobody in Tehran saw coming, was that this time, America didn't just respond militarily. America deployed the one weapon that a regime built on propaganda, manipulation, and economic control cannot survive. Financial warfare, total, surgical, unprecedented in scale. We're not talking about sanctions here. We've had sanctions on Iran for decades. Iran found ways around sanctions. They built shadow fleets. They sold oil through back channels. They moved money through proxies. They thought they had cracked the code on American economic pressure. They were wrong. What America deployed this time is something entirely different. And when you understand what it actually is, you'll understand why Iranian officials are making phone calls right now that they never thought they'd be making. Segment 2, introducing the weapon. 3:30, ADMR. The weapon America deployed has 3 components, and each one alone would be painful for Iran. Together, they are lethal to the regime's survival. Component 1, cryptocurrency seizure. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, wait, didn't Iran figure out how to use crypto to bypass sanctions? Yes, they did. For years, Iran's Revolutionary Guard used cryptocurrency, specifically stablecoins tied to the US dollar, to move money across borders invisibly. They used it to fund proxy operations in Yemen. They used it to pay Hezbollah. They used it to purchase weapons components from suppliers in China and Russia who wouldn't accept traditional wire transfers. It was brilliant, actually. And for a while, it worked perfectly, until this week. The United States Treasury, working alongside military intelligence, identified and seized Iranian cryptocurrency wallets containing hundreds of millions of dollars in stablecoin assets. Not Bitcoin, stablecoins. Digital dollars that Iran thought were beyond American reach. Gone. Frozen. Inaccessible. The Iranian government woke up one morning and discovered that their invisible financial pipeline, the one they built specifically to survive American pressure, had been cut. That is not a small thing. That is catastrophic for their operational capacity. Component 2, oil storage elimination. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent revealed something last week that most people glossed over. Iran has run out of oil storage. Read that again. Iran, a country whose entire economy runs on oil revenue, has literally nowhere left to put its oil. Because the blockade has prevented exports. Because the shadow fleet has been systematically intercepted. Because buyer after buyer in Asia has been warned, clearly and directly, that purchasing Iranian oil means losing access to the American financial system. And when you can't sell your oil, and you can't store your oil wells eventually have to shut down. Bessent said it plainly. Iran may be forced to shut down oil wells within weeks. Do you understand what that means for a government that has no other source of revenue? It means the regime cannot pay its military. It means the regime cannot pay the IRGC. It means the regime cannot pay the bureaucrats and judges and police officers who keep it in power. When a dictatorship can't pay the people holding its guns, that dictatorship is in a very precarious position. Component 3, the global coalition of financial isolation. This is the part nobody is talking about. The United States didn't just squeeze Iran's money alone. The US coordinated with the UK, France, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia to simultaneously apply financial pressure from every direction. British and French warships are now in the Middle East. The UAE, which previously was quietly maintaining economic ties with Iran, has now publicly condemned Iranian attacks and is actively cooperating with US financial enforcement. That is a massive shift. The UAE was Iran's backdoor. Dubai was where Iranian money went to hide. Iranian businessmen used UAE banking channels for decades to circumvent Western sanctions. That door is now closing. And Iran knows it. These three components combined, crypto seizure, oil storage collapse, global financial coalition, constitute the most comprehensive economic strangulation of a hostile regime in modern American history. This is the weapon Iran fears most, not because it destroys buildings, but because it destroys the regime's ability to function, to pay its people, and most dangerously for the Ayatollah, to maintain the loyalty of the very forces keeping him in power. Segment 3, expert validation, 8 Novkas, 13 Aurot. Now let's bring in some perspective here, because I want you to hear this not just from me. General Jack Keane, one of the most respected military minds in America, has been saying for weeks that economic pressure is the decisive force in this conflict. His words, Iran is trying to break our will. That's it. That's their entire strategy. They're not trying to win a military confrontation with the United States Navy. They know they can't win that. They're trying to make the pain expensive enough, for long enough, that American public opinion shifts, political pressure builds, and Washington offers a deal that lets the regime survive and rearm. That's the game. And the financial weapon we just deployed says, we see your game, and we're not playing it. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has been even more direct. His argument is simple. Any deal with Iran that leaves the IRGC intact, leaves the Revolutionary Guard funded, armed, and operational, is not a deal. It's a delay. Because the IRGC exists for one purpose: to spread Iranian revolutionary ideology by force across the Middle East. That purpose doesn't change based on what Iran's diplomats sign in a negotiating room. The financial weapon being deployed right now isn't just about the nuclear program. It's about dismantling the IRGC's financial infrastructure entirely, cutting off their crypto channels, cutting off their oil revenue, cutting off their ability to fund Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and every other proxy force they've built over 47 years. That is the objective. And Senator Lindsey Graham said something this week that crystallized everything. Iran is the weakest it has been since 1979, since the revolution itself. Think about that. For 47 years, this regime has survived every form of American pressure. Sanctions, assassinations, cyber attacks, proxy wars, military strikes. And it survived all of it because it always had one thing: money. Money from oil. Money from proxies. Money from shadow fleets. Money from cryptocurrency. Now, for the first time in the regime's history, all of those financial pipelines are being cut simultaneously. This is what makes the current moment genuinely different from every previous confrontation with Iran. This isn't 2015. This isn't Obama offering relief in exchange for promises. This isn't pallets of cash and a nuclear deal that Iran violated within years. This is a comprehensive financial siege, and it is working. Segment 4, the regime's response, showing the panic, 13 Uart, 1830. Now here's how you know the weapon is working. Watch what Iran does, not what Iran says, what they do. Because regimes under real pressure behave in very specific, very predictable ways. And Iran right now is displaying every single symptom. Symptom 1. They changed their negotiating position twice in 1 week. A regime that is confident, stable, and holding leverage does not change its position twice in 1 week. Iran came to the table with maximalist demands. $300 billion in unfrozen assets, no inspections, no dismantlement. Trump called it a piece of garbage, publicly. And you know what happened? Iran came back with a new offer, then another one. Each one slightly more conciliatory than the last. That is not the behavior of a regime that believes it's winning. That is the behavior of a regime that is watching its financial oxygen supply get cut off and is desperately searching for a way to breathe. Symptom 2. Internal fracturing. Secretary of State Marco Rubio revealed something critically important this week. There is tremendous infighting within the Iranian regime right now. This is not normal. Iran's political structure is designed for discipline. The Ayatollah speaks, everyone else obeys. That's how it's worked for 47 years. But when money runs out, discipline breaks down. IRGC commanders who aren't getting paid start asking questions. Bureaucrats who can't access funds start making individual deals. Politicians who see the regime weakening start positioning themselves for what comes after. This is what financial collapse looks like from the inside of an authoritarian government. And it is happening right now inside Iran. Kieran Skinner, one of the most sophisticated foreign policy analysts in Washington, described it as a leadership crisis. Not a military crisis, not a diplomatic crisis, a leadership crisis, the kind that precedes regime change. Symptom 3, the kamikaze dolphin story. I know how that sounds, but stay with me here, because this is actually important. Reports emerged that Iran was considering deploying trained dolphins, marine mammals, as weapons in the Strait of Hormuz. Set aside for a moment how desperate that sounds. Think about what it tells you about Iran's conventional military capability right now. The United States Navy has destroyers, carrier strike groups, Super Hornets, hypersonic missile systems, the most sophisticated naval force in human history. And Iran's response, their answer to that, is reportedly dolphins. That is not the military posture of a confident power. That is the improvisation of a force that has exhausted its conventional options and is reaching for anything that might create a symbolic deterrent. It doesn't work militarily, but it tells you everything about where Iran's military capability actually stands right now. Symptom 4, the ceasefire violations. Here's the paradox that most analysts miss. Iran keeps violating the ceasefire. They attack UAE shipping. They launch drones. They harass vessels in the Strait. On the surface, that looks like strength. It's not. It's panic in action. A regime that is confident in its diplomatic position stops provoking. It waits for the deal to close. Iran can't stop provoking because it needs to maintain the appearance of leverage it is rapidly losing. Every drone attack, every ship seizure, every ceasefire violation is Iran screaming, "We still matter, we still have power, you still need to deal with us on our terms." But the financial weapon doesn't care about drones. The financial weapon doesn't respond to ceasefire violations. It just keeps tightening every day, every hour. Regardless of what Iran does militarily, that's what makes it so devastating. Segment 5, the Trump play, 1830-23 dollars. Now let's talk about the strategy behind all of this, because this didn't happen by accident. President Trump has been playing a very specific strategic game with Iran, and it's working. But it requires you to zoom out and see the whole board. Here's what Trump understood from day one of this confrontation. Iran has one fear above all others, not military defeat. Military defeats, the regime can survive. They can call it martyrdom. They can use it as propaganda. They can recruit on the back of it. No, what Iran fears most is what happens when ordinary Iranian citizens look at their government and see a regime that cannot feed them, cannot pay them, cannot protect them, and cannot deliver on any of its promises. That's the moment the regime loses the one thing keeping it alive, the passive compliance of the Iranian people. Trump's financial weapon is not aimed at Iran's military. It is aimed at the social contract between the Iranian government and its people. And the Ayatollah knows it. Think about what we've seen in just the last several weeks. Iranian oil revenues cut. Iranian crypto infrastructure seized. Iranian shadow fleet systematically intercepted. Iranian foreign reserves frozen. Iranian banking access globally restricted. The result? Iranian inflation is spiraling. Iranian citizens are watching their currency collapse. Iranian merchants can't import basic goods. Iranian factories are shutting down. And reports from inside Iran describe protests beginning to brew again, the same kinds of street-level anger that erupted in 2019 and 2022. Except this time, the regime has far fewer financial resources to suppress them. The playbook was simple. Make it impossible for the regime to buy the loyalty of the institutions keeping it in power. Make it impossible for the regime to distract its population with economic promises. Make it economically rational for Iranian elites to consider the alternative. And then wait. Trump said it himself. Iran is in a state of collapse, not military collapse, economic and institutional collapse. The kind you can't bomb your way out of, the kind you can't negotiate your way out of, the kind that only ends one of two ways: a genuine, verifiable, comprehensive agreement that dismantles the nuclear program and defunds the IRGC, or regime change from within. Either outcome works for American strategic interests. Either outcome ends the nuclear threat, and Iran is now being forced to choose between them. Segment 6, the stakes. What happens next? 23 hour, 28 hours. So what happens now? What do the next 72 hours look like? Here's what we know. The negotiations are continuing. Despite everything, the ceasefire violations, the drone attacks, the maximalist demands, the talks have not collapsed. Trump canceled the Pakistan talks, but back-channel communications are still open. Rubio confirmed it. Bessent confirmed it. And interestingly, UAE leadership has been actively urging Trump to keep talking. The UAE understands something strategically important. A deal, even an imperfect deal, that ends the Strait of Hormuz crisis reopens the flow of Gulf energy to global markets. And that is worth an enormous amount to Gulf economies. So the regional pressure on Iran to close a deal is not just coming from Washington, it's coming from Iran's own neighbors, nations that Iran has been attacking. Telling Iran, take the deal, because the alternative is worse. Here's the scenario that should concern everyone. Not Iranian military escalation. That's manageable. The concerning scenario is an Iranian regime so economically desperate, so internally fractured, that it makes a catastrophic miscalculation, launches a strike that goes too far, kills Americans, forces a military response that neither side can walk back from. General Keane has warned about this explicitly. A weakened, panicked regime is often more dangerous than a strong, confident one, because a strong regime calculates consequences. A desperate regime gambles. That is the razor's edge the next 72 hours walk. And that is why the financial weapon, as effective as it has been, needs to be paired with a clear, credible off-ramp for Iran. Not a generous off-ramp, not a face-saving gift, but a clear, verifiable path that lets the regime say to its own people, we negotiated our way to survival, because the alternative, a regime with nothing left to lose, is the most dangerous version of Iran imaginable. Segment 7, the historical context, 28 to 33 hours. Let me put this in historical context, because we've been here before, sort of. In 1990, Saddam Hussein made a calculation. He believed America was too domestically distracted, too politically divided, too war-weary to respond to his invasion of Kuwait with force. He was wrong. In 2003, Muammar Gaddafi watched what happened in Iraq. He watched American financial and military pressure dismantle one regime. And he made a different calculation. He picked up the phone. He called Washington. He said, what do I need to do? Libya's weapons of mass destruction program was dismantled without a single American casualty because financial and military pressure, combined, created a rational decision point. That is the template being applied to Iran right now. The question is, does the current Iranian leadership have a Gaddafi moment in them? Do they have the pragmatic survival instinct to recognize that the financial weapon deployed against them is not survivable? Do they have a leader capable of making a deal that saves the regime at the cost of the nuclear program?